Madam President, I listened this week to the distinguished chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee. Senator Mikulski made a compelling case for passing a clean, short-term, continuing resolution through November 15th of this year so we can actually get on the business of debating and passing appropriations bills. We have a lot of sound and fury signifying nothing, to quote Shakespeare here, but we actually ought to vote up or down on something. We ought to actually, it's easier to give speeches or phony filibusters or whatever and say, look what we're accomplishing. Well, it's not accomplishing anything. It's allowing you to go home and saying, I never voted on this, but here's what I would do if I could vote. Well, here's a way to vote. I agree with everything the chairwoman said, and particularly about the bipartisan way the committee has written and reported bills this year. Any one of those bills could be debated and voted on today. Vote yes, vote no, but vote. Not maybe, but yes or no. Conference them with the House that they pass, send them to the president. Actually, there's some precedent for doing that, precedent of over 200 years of precedent doing it that way. Instead, we repeat this all too familiar drama, where again, the high stakes stalemate over simply keeping the federal government functioning. What has once been the regular business of Congress has again been replaced by political theater and another artificial, made in Congress crisis that threatens the economy and in ways large and small threatens every single family in America. Don't come on this floor and say you stand for family values when you're willing to destroy the plans for retirement of families, the savings for their children to go to college, their own economy, and possibly their job. Because once again, grandstanding prevails over common sense, comedy, cooperation, three values that are vital to the effective functioning of representative government. And those who travel around our states, and I do all the time, and we listen to our constituents, we know the cost of a government shutdown, the devastating effects of sequestration. Vermont is not unique in having fewer children in Head Start program, or medical researchers at our fine institutions who can't obtain research grants, or seniors who are cut off from Meals on Wheels, or young veterans back from Iraq or Afghanistan who can't find jobs, or families sleeping in shelters or on the streets because there's no safety net housing assistance. But some members of the House and Senate whose pay will continue will say how we've got to cut off all this help. What are we as a country? You know, the decisions we make have real and serious consequences for our economy, for our children and our community, ranging from St. Johnsbury, Vermont to Houston, Texas. And as chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee that funds the Department of State and Foreign Operations, let me speak briefly about the consequences of shutting down the government and have a full year continuing resolution. Let me talk about what that does for U.S. national security. Because it should make every single senator of either party think long and hard about the role they want the United States to play in an increasingly competitive and dangerous world. We hear over and over again on this floor the saying, freedom isn't free. Well, it's not. And the corollary of that is neither are U.S. security and U.S. influence. And by doing this continuing resolution and not having regular order, here's what's at stake. U.S. leadership in the Middle East, at the United Nations, in Africa, in South and Central Asia, and in fact, here in our own hemisphere. If the government shuts down, the impact's going to be felt here at home, It's going to be felt by our allies, but more importantly, it's going to be exploited by our adversaries. And just watch, look at what's happened the last few weeks in Kenya, the last few days in Kenya. We have adversaries, Madam President. We have very serious ones. So it's the worst hypocrisy because those same senators who are toying with shutting down the government want the United States to respond when war breaks out in Syria, or famine in Ethiopia, or an outbreak of the Ebola virus, or a devastating earthquake in Haiti, or a terrorist attack in Kenya, or the false imprisonment of a constituent in Nicaragua, or the kidnapping of an American missionary in the Philippines. They will come to the floor and give great speeches wanting the United States to solve the problem or to rally others to help solve it. But they're willing to do away with paying the salaries of our diplomats or our aid workers or our dues to the United Nations or emergency food aid or support for NATO or the World Health Organization or the myriad of other programs and organizations depend upon us and serve our interests around the world. They think that somehow this is going to be paid for with pixie dust. Well, you watched that movie as a child. We're grown-ups now, and we're dealing with the real world. Because when we pull back, when we don't lead, others are only too happy to fill the vacuum. Talking about this shutdown. It would mean the Export-Import Bank, which provides financing to United States companies, would immediately stop processing new applications. It would lose $2 to $4 billion in monthly income for U.S. exporters. It would jeopardize approximately 30,000 American jobs. And it would reduce deposits to the U.S. Treasury by 15 to 20 million per month as a result of fees that go uncollected by the bank. The Overseas Private Investment Corporation. So the corporation provides financing and insurance to American companies that invest overseas. It loses its authority to function. Couldn't make disbursements that bring to a screeching halt the activities of hundreds of U.S. businesses that rely on OPEC financing. The State Foreign Operations Bill, Senator Lindsey Graham and I wrote, that was reported by the Appropriations Committee on July 25th by a lopsided bipartisan vote of 23 to 7, protects U.S. national security interests, but also responds to compelling humanitarian needs, because we Americans do feel we have a moral responsibility as the wealthiest, most powerful nation on earth. This speaks to the moral core of what we are as Americans. Senator Graham's and my bill includes $8.5 billion for global health programs. A full-year continuing resolution would mean $389 million less to combat HIV, AIDS, and other preventable diseases like malaria, tuberculosis, pneumonia, malnutrition. None of us have children or grandchildren have to worry about malaria, tuberculosis, pneumonia, and malnutrition. But with the relatively small amounts that we spend, we can help people and children in other countries. And doesn't that speak to our moral center as a nation? Because if we have this continuing resolution, it's going to mean tens of thousands of additional deaths from these diseases. Tens of thousands. Look at the visit some of these areas as I have and other senators have and see these children and look at them and say, I've just condemned you to death. I've condemned you to death because you were born in the wrong place and you're poor. It means tens of thousands of additional children orphaned by AIDS. It means millions fewer life-saving immunization for children. So tens of thousands of preventable deaths. The immunization that my grandchildren get is a routine thing. For pennies, we can provide to thousands of children around the world. And we're saying, no, we're not going to do that because we have a political point to make. Madam President, we're grown-ups. We're not soundbite aficionados. We should be legislators. The Senate bill includes $2.5 billion, which is 115 million above a full year continuing resolution for programs in the poorest countries. And these have bipartisan support. Republicans and Democrats supporting for basic and higher education, food security, energy, and water and sanitation programs. And Madam President, if we're not interested from a moral point of view, if we're not interested because it hits our conscience, then let's just be pragmatic of our security. Because if we don't do this, the alternative to development and opportunity is poverty and religious extremism, transnational crime, violent insurgencies. It's a growing reality across the globe, from Somalia to Mexico. And it threatens our economy, our security, and the security of our allies. We think it's a dollar and cents, but if one of our constituents is trapped in one of these areas where there are terrorist groups that we could have undermined if we'd been in there working with the governments of those countries, we say move heaven and earth to get them out. Well, we don't have to move heaven and earth. We can just start doing basic work today. But unfortunately, those who favor a continuing resolution will slash the funds that counter these threats that I talk about from Somalia to Mexico. And the list goes on and on. A government shutdown is a complete failure of our responsibility as legislators. We're sent here to make decisions, not slogans, to make government work for the American people and for the good of the nation, including our national security and our interests around the globe. Madam President, over and over again, there are those who want to give speeches, but they don't want to vote on anything real. It allows them to go home to their supporters and take any position they want because they never voted. Well, I would tell you right now, funding the government by continuing resolution, we have to continue to do that. That's irresponsible and it's dangerous. It diminishes our standing in the world. It erodes our leadership. It's unworthy of the Congress. It's a betrayal of the people who sent us here. Let's have, if not the courage, at least the honesty to bring up these appropriations bills and vote on them one by one. Vote yes, vote no, but vote them. And stand up and be counted. Don't hide behind the baloney we've heard.